everyone, and welcome to this week's Wildlife Wednesday weekly roundup. We apologize for the delay of our live broadcast this week. We do live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Sometimes our internet speeds are not what we would wish. About 5 minutes ago, our internet speed was down to 1 megabit per second. I'm not quite sure what's going on, probably some broken line somewhere, but hopefully this is coming to everyone from around the world and you're able to see us okay, and our quality is doing all right this week. We've got some great video to show you this week, particularly when it comes to wolves and grizzlies. There's a few videos that we couldn't quite get up for you in time. We'll go ahead and we'll show you those throughout the week and on our next week's broadcast. But let's go ahead and get started with my favorite video of the week, which is wolves and grizzlies playing. Let's tune in with our naturalist, Josh.
Hello everyone, naturalist Josh Metton here with Ecotour Adventures. I want to share with you a recent video I got on a multi-day tour of Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks. What we're seeing is what we believe a subadult wolf from the Junction Butte pack, and then two subadult bears from the area as well. These two grizzlies, as you can see by their size, they're pretty big, but they are not full-size bears yet, and they're hanging out together, which is an indication that these are probably siblings who recently dispersed from their mother. What's so interesting about this video is the behavior that we're seeing here. It's not aggressive. It seems to be more playful, and it's a good example of how animals in the wild play with members of their own species, but also potentially with members of other species. Why do animals play? Well, play is something that animals do because it's simply fun. It's no different than what humans do for playing, or what our pets do when they want to play with us. They enjoy it. That said, play is something that develops valuable skills that we will use later in life. As you can see from this video, we don't think this is the first time that these cubs have played with a wolf from the Junction Butte pack. This is from last summer when the cubs were still with their mother. These animals have gotten to know each other because they live in the same area, and as a result, they've been able to form relationships where they can coexist. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. For more information about our multi-day tours, please visit www.jhecotouradventures.com.
How adorable is that? I've only been fortunate to see wolves and bears playing just a few times in my life, and it's always a really fascinating thing to see. Wolves typically, when they're in an aggressive encounter over a carcass or fighting with a bear, have very low tails, and you can see in all of that imagery the tails were up and wagging and engaged. It's pretty fascinating to see these two predators interacting in a friendly way versus what we would typically see where they're having a little bit of an argument over who owns the local food source. I thought it would be fun after last week and talking about all our local berries that the bears are eating to talk about something that's not a berry but looks a little bit like one. Let's tune in. When we talked about berries the other week, I didn't speak about wild rose, and that's because its fruit, while it looks much like a berry, is in fact a rose hip. When the flower gathers together its pistils after it sheds its petals, it creates a fruiting body that tastes a bit like an apple. Early settlers were quite famous for taking these thorny bushes plants and these little fruits, and they would make them into jams and jellies. Native peoples like to use the roots for medicinal ailments, and people all over the world dry rose hips for the use in teas and other foods.
Rose hips are a great source of energy and protein and are eaten by a lot of different kinds of wildlife, including deer, coyote, bears, and more. A lot of birds and mammals are sustained by those dry rose hips when the ground is covered in snow and the temperatures drop. Rose hips are very high in vitamin C, and porcupines and beavers also make heavy use of the leaves. The plants themselves create excellent cover and nesting opportunities. In just a couple minutes of picking along the river bottoms, I've got enough rosehip fruits to go ahead and make a lot of tea by dehydrating or leaving these hips out in the dry, hot sun. We'll have to see this winter how my rosehip tea tastes, because I'm going to admit I've never done it before, but I'll certainly keep you posted.
So I'm pretty excited to see how my rosehip tea comes out. I'll certainly keep you guys all informed when everything's ready. So far, I've put everything in the dehydrator, and it's taking a long time for those big burly hips to dehydrate. Might take a couple rounds, but hopefully I'll have some really tasty tea at the end. So we'll see how it goes. Now, where is everyone joining us from today? It sounds like some of you guys have been good enough to go ahead and find our old not working link and transfer over to our new link. Thank you guys so much for finding me. It also sounds like the broadcast is getting out, so yay, Jackson Hole has some internet at least today. I'd love to know where folks are tuning in from. And then I also, of course, if you can, would encourage you to like and share this video, particularly this week, so people can find it. And we would certainly enjoy your support in that regard. It's not exactly money free to produce these videos, and we sure appreciate your support. All right, back to the fun part. I think it'd be pretty cool to take a look at an annual ritual of fall, which is just getting started up now that we're in September. We had our first snowfall of winter this week. We had our last snowfall of last winter in July. So if you're tuning in there, that means we typically have about a 2 to 3 month period where we're frost free. Looks like that's just about over, which means it's time for the elk rut to begin. Let's go ahead and tune in and check that out.
Hello everyone, Josh here with EcoTour Adventures. I wanted to share with you this recent video I got in Grand Teton National Park of a bull elk and a herd of cows. It is the start of the rut or mating season here in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and as you can see here, this bull elk has stripped all of the velvet off of his antlers. Velvet is a fuzzy hair-like covering that protects the growing antlers throughout the summer season. Believe it or not, these giant antlers on this bull grew in about a 100-day span throughout the kind of really green, lush vegetation months of the summer. Now that they've stopped growing, the bone has been exposed by the bull removing the velvet by stripping them and rubbing them on trees, getting that nice brown color. Right now we're in what's called the pre-rut, so the mating season hasn't really gotten going yet, but bulls are starting to find herds of cows. These animals are still very focused on foraging and building up fat reserves for the coming winter. Over the next few weeks, the rut will intensify, and we're going to start hearing bull elk bugling, chasing each other around, and fighting as they attempt to earn opportunities to mate. Fall's a really exciting time to watch not only elk, but other animals in Grand Teton Yellowstone National Parks. To learn more about the elk rut, please visit www.jhecotouradventures.com and check out our blog. Thanks for watching.
The elk rut is a wonderful annual ritual of fall here, and as it continues to progress and pick up steam, we're going to have lots more footage of giant bull elk and their large antlers, hopefully maybe some fighting for you as well. It's an exciting time, and just after they get started, the moose start ramping up as well. We did have a video this week wanting to show you how 399 is doing. She's busy eating berries. She's gaining some weight at last. We were a little concerned that she was maybe a little underweight. She's starting to look a little rounder. All 4 cubs are doing well, as is Grizzly Bear 610, and we'll give you more information on them next week. But in the meantime, let's tune in with our naturalist Sarah, who wants to talk about one of the smallest residents of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem.
Hello Wildlife Watchers, this is Guide Sarah Ernst. I'm out on a hike in the Palisades Wilderness Study Area, and I thought I'd introduce you to someone who's not quite as charismatic as the bears and the wolves and the moose that we've been seeing, but still plays a pretty important part in the ecosystem around here. This This is a Mormon cricket, although technically she's not a cricket, she's a katydid, but they're all still part of the greater grasshopper katydid cricket family. And they look pretty prehistoric and terrifying, but they're harmless animals. This thing that looks like a horrible stinger in the back of her abdomen is an ovipositor. It's a little appendage that they use to direct their eggs when they're laying their eggs. So it looks scary, but it's completely harmless. We often see these on our trips in these open fields, starting around the end of July and then continuing through September. I think they're kind of cute, those little eyes. About as docile as an insect can be, important food source for wildlife. Kind of a fun thing to look for when you're visiting Jackson Hole this time of year.
Those Mormon crickets, in my opinion, really are kind of cute. And it was an annual tradition for me as a kid to run through the sagebrush meadows and see hundreds of them leaping in front of me. In fact, I think they're called the Mormon crickets because a large plague of them first originally arrived with the Mormon settlers and ate all over their crops. I'll have to do a little bit of history research on that, but as I recall, it was the Mormon cricket that caused all of that trouble and created sort of a new biblical plague for those new settlers to the west. All right, speaking of disasters, our naturalist and friend Laura, who always brings us such great footage every week, has been looking into something she's been intrigued in from quite some time, which is the Teton Dam disaster. Let's go check it out.
Hi guys, this is Laura. I'm out at a site near Yellowstone National Park that I've been personally curious about for a long time. This site is called the Teton Dam, which collapsed on June 5th, 1976. Leading up to the collapse of this dam, there were a lot of red flags. First of all, the rock or the soil beneath the proposed dam site was volcanic. That makes sense because of our proximity to the Yellowstone caldera. This volcano has been erupting for the past 16.5 million years, typically once or twice every million. So the predominant soils here are rhyolitic or basaltic, which are two types of igneous rock, both too porous to construct a dam, especially an earthen dam, which was the dam that was proposed here. Secondly, within 5 years' time of the construction of this dam beginning, there were 5 major earthquakes within a 30-mile vicinity of the site. Now, honestly, I'm not a geologist, but to me, that would raise some concerns. Engineers began the construction in 1974. As they constructed the dam, they found fissures beneath the land surface. A fissure is just like an empty space, a hollow point, a tube underneath the ground, one of which was so large that a person could crawl inside. Engineers assured folks nearby that, hey, we can fill these fissures in with grout and make sure that the landscape is stable. 1975, when they filled up the reservoir, it was about 240 feet deep. And just like geologists had predicted on the day of the failure, the dam sprung a leak. So bulldozer crews went out onto the dam in an attempt to plug the leak. However, their patch didn't work. The dam quickly collapsed. The bulldozer drivers were pulled to safety with ropes, so luckily they did survive. However, 11 people downstream from the broken dam were not so lucky. The flow of the water raging out of this broken dam site was more than the flow of Niagara Falls. That's over 2 million cubic feet per second worth of high flow, high velocity water just pouring out.
So a pretty fascinating recent historical event. I've always wanted to go out and visit the site of the Teton Dam, and it's so nice that Laura was able to go out there and get some footage about something that regionally is very important to our area, and the amount of disasters in terms of the riparian habitat that was ruined, the lakeside, streamside habitat, wildlife habitat, cattle ranches, and other things from this disaster is still quite firmly remembered today. We do have better irrigation systems in place in that area today. Of course, they know better than to build an earthen dam, but we thank Laura for bringing us some information on that pretty interesting historical event. Okay, we've still got our fall workshop coming up, everybody. If you're interested in joining us, it's going to be quite the adventure. Let's check in with Josh to find out more about it.
Hello, this is Josh Metton, EcoTour Adventures naturalist and co-leader of our 2020 Fall Photography Workshop with Sony Alpha Collective photographer Nate Luby, better known as Nate in the Wild. This year's workshop is October 2nd through 10th, and we wanted to share this highlight reel with you from last year's trip. Nate and I are thrilled to be exploring fall in Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks with you again. It's one of our favorite times of year to photograph the diverse wildlife and stunning landscapes of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Our adventure starts in Jackson Hole at the doorstep of Grand Teton National Park, where we'll spend several days looking for bugling elk, moose, grizzlies, and black bears beneath the mighty Teton Range. We'll have opportunities to photograph golden aspen tree groves in this stunning landscape while learning tips and tricks to take your images to the next level. During classroom sessions, learn how to use Lightroom and get the most out of your images, including tips for time-lapse and astrophotography, two of Nate Luby's specialties. In Yellowstone National Park, we'll explore the park's diverse thermal features, including the Old Faithful area and famous Grand Prismatic Spring. Our national mammal, bison, are a frequent sight in Yellowstone, creating numerous opportunities for photographs. In the Lamar Valley, we'll look for wolves, who were successfully reintroduced to the park 25 years ago in 1995. Learn about these apex predators at a private dinner presentation with a Yellowstone wolf biologist. Join us on this trip of a lifetime, October 2nd through 10th, 2020. We can't wait to share the best of Grand Teton and Yellowstone with you.
A trip of a lifetime for sure. If you want more information about our fall workshop, follow the link that Taylor has nicely put in the comments section for us and give us a call. We'd love to tell you more about this annual fall event that is not to be missed. All right, so that's our new videos for the week for you all. We did have two that because of technical difficulties we couldn't get to. Next week we're gonna bring you some footage of grizzly bear 399 and 610. Nice long segment about the two of them, as well as a really fun segment from lots of different guides about life along the river bottoms, riparian corridors. We've got river otters by request from our guide Laura, as well as moose and lots more for you all to see, so I hope you will join us. But now it's time for our trivia questions of the week. So we're gonna start by showing you last week's trivia question and give you all a chance to answer that one. And then you have a chance to win a $10 gift card to our EcoTour store, which we started during the COVID closure the first time, to go ahead and fund employee health insurance. So if you'd like to support your favorite naturalist and guide, feel free to check that store out, answer our question of the week this week correctly, and you could get a chance to win that card. First though, let's start with last week's question, which was, I think, a little bit too easy. I keep asking ones that are either too easy or too hard. The question is, what is the name of this animal? It's a photo I took a couple years ago in Yellowstone National Park. You can see that this animal has a white rear end and large horns. Go ahead and guess in the comment section if you want to in terms of what this animal is. And I was looking for the full name. I was not going to accept sheep, which is a hint. It is, in fact, those are bighorn sheep, and more specifically, they are bighorn sheep rams from behind. That whole gaggle of them decided to create quite a traffic jam as they wandered down the road, the middle of the road in Yellowstone National Park a few years ago. So we are going to get a little bit of a facelift soon for our Wildlife Wednesday broadcasts. We're going to go ahead and upgrade a little bit from the background that you see to a new background. And so I thought our trivia question of the week should be a fond, fond farewell to our photograph back here, which I took a number of years ago from a helicopter. My question of the week for a $10 gift card is, can you name this feature in Yellowstone National Park? Do you guys know what that feature is called? I'll give you a hint, it's a hot spring. Another good hint is it is the second largest hot spring in the world, definitely the largest in North America, and it is world famous. A couple of years ago, somebody decided to fly a drone over it and got a drone stuck in it right around there. They still haven't gotten the drone out, is my understanding, because that's boiling water. What are you going to do? Don't fly drones in Yellowstone, folks, right? If you know the name of this hot spring, this very famous hot spring, it's located in Midway Geyser Basin in Yellowstone National Park. Go ahead and put it in the comment section for your chance to win. And I think you guys are going to really like our new setup when it arrives through the U.S. mail. We're pretty excited about that as well. All right, guys, so that's our videos and our trivia for the week. If you have any questions for me, I'll be answering them live. So go ahead and type them in the comment section. Bear with me. I'm going to grab my iPad here to read your comments. So if you see me looking down, that's what I'm doing. And we'll see if we can't get you guys some answers. Oh, wow. I thought that was going to be a stumper. And people are already getting it right. So I need to ask some more difficult questions, maybe. I don't know. You guys are too smart for this. I'm very impressed. Let's see here. Maybe I should put this in our online store. Would people like to buy that? Because I could certainly make that available. Let me know. Let's see here. Dawn, I hear you say, I hear your cat cameo, please. She almost just came up on the couch. She's a cat. I can't make her come in for an appearance. One of these days, she's probably going to trip over the tripod or something during the broadcast. But if you're hearing the meowing in the background, that is Orca, the cat. She's black and white, loves water, and enjoys killing things. So her name is Orca. But thanks, Dawn. We appreciate that. Let's see here. Oh, Alice wants us to know she has rose hips in her yard and plans to try and make tea too. Alice, I'm so excited. We're going to do this adventure together. Any rose will work. Those were wild roses, but domestic roses make beautiful hips too. And in fact, I suspect domestic roses are probably going to have a more fragrant rose hip than the wild roses, although they do smell nice. So Alice, your tea might end up better than mine. I don't know, but you can put it out in the hot sun and just let it dehydrate it away. I've seen other things online where people will put them in an oven at about 150 degrees, which acts as a great dehydrator if you don't have one. So Alice, I'm really excited. Please do send us a photo. I'd love to show it, with your permission, of course, of you working with those rose hips. I've also heard that in the 1930s and 40s, people would drink rose hip tea or rose hip wine as an excellent source of vitamin C. So if anybody knows anything about that, I'd love to hear more about that. But Alice, thank you so much for tuning in. It's so great to see you. Let's see here. And Orca's making a bunch of noise. Well, let's see. Does anybody have... Oh, here we go. Where can a person locate bobcats in Yellowstone or Grand Teton National Park? Is dawn or dusk better? Dawn, if I knew that, I would be probably in exactly the same shoes I'm in now. Just better at finding bobcats. So the bobcats I have found over the years have, you're right, always been in crepuscular light, very early dawn, very late dusk. I tend to have more success in the winter time than I do in the summer. That's not necessarily because bobcats are more or less around. I think it's because I see their tracks in the winter, and that gives me the opportunity to focus on them. We did have a very famous bobcat in Yellowstone National Park during the winter a couple winters ago that was spending its time in the Hayden Valley. That bobcat's now gone, of course, but that was the first time I had seen much bobcat activity in that area. Generally, when it comes to bobcats, you're looking where their prey is. So bobcats rely on small rodents, small mammals for food, aspen groves, riparian habitat, places where those animals thrive is where you're going to have the most success with bobcats. Actually kind of similar habitat in many ways to where coyotes hunt, except for bobcats don't do open fields like a coyote would. So basically they're both rodent hunters. Foxes, bobcats, coyotes, all of those animals are seeking those. American marten also, but they're definitely going to be more in the aspen or lodgepole habitat. Dawn or dusk is just as good. I haven't seen enough bobcats to necessarily have a good scientific number for that, but it's just as good for bobcats as it is for Canada lynx, as it is for mountain lions. All the cats are equally good at dawn and dusk, which would make sense if you think about your house cat. That's when they're most active as well. So thanks very much, Dawn, for that question. I wish I had a great spot. I could just be like, there's a bobcat. But they are relatively rare in the ecosystem, so it's a real thrill for me to see one for sure. Let's see what we have here. When do grizzlies start to hibernate? Rosalie, that's a great question. Thanks so much for it. And thank you for joining us again this week. It depends on the bear as to when they hibernate, and it depends on the ecosystem they live in. So let's first of all really make things confusing by just stating for the record, bears don't hibernate. Yeah, I said it. And you're all going, what? Bears don't hibernate. They do something very similar, but it has a slightly different name. Bears anestivate. So if you were to take your average chipmunk, for instance, out of hibernation, and you were to take a look at that chipmunk, his heart rate would be very, very low, just a couple beats a minute, and his breathing rate would be even lower, maybe a breath, 2 breaths a minute. That's true hibernation, where they are in a metabolic state that is much, much deeper than what we would think of as a, say, coma in a human. And a ground squirrel or, you know, a chipmunk or something hibernating is going to be using up their body fat stores. They're not going to urinate, they're not going to defecate, and if they run out of body fat, they'll just drift off and they won't wake up. A grizzly bear is a little bit of a different situation. They are not hibernating, they're anestivating, which means their heart rate is just a couple beats below a normal resting sleeping rate, and their breathing rate is just a little bit below a normal resting rate. And more importantly, their body temperature is far, far higher than a hibernating animal, which would be near freezing. A bear is just going to be a couple degrees below what would be normal for a deep sleep. And so it would be easier to describe anestivation as a coma, but that's not quite right either. They're not in a coma, and they can actually wake themselves up out of it. So if they run out of body fat to feed on, you know, a chipmunk, like we said, would just use up their muscle fat, muscle tissue, and then if they use that up, they would just die. If a grizzly bear goes through their body fat, they'll actually awaken and go find some food. So it's not like hibernation at all. As for when they enter hibernation, it's a little bit different by region, and it's a little bit different by male, female, and whether or not they have cubs. So males stay out the longest. It's not unheard of to see a male bear traveling around in Grand Teton and Yellowstone even into January of every year. Females with cubs go in the earliest and they stay in the longest. It's not uncommon to see black bears heading into hibernation even in late October, early November. Pregnant female grizzlies and females with cubs will go in typically sometime in the November time, but it's all based on hormonal response. So basically, when the bear can't make as many calories, eat as many calories as it costs to be up and awake, a hormonal switch triggers in their brain and says it's time to go to sleep. So when that will happen depends greatly on how our fall progresses, how much snow we get, how quickly, and so the date can vary a little bit from year to year. Now, interestingly enough, bears don't have to hibernate. They hibernate because of a time of famine. So if you think of winter as a time of little food rather than a time of cold, they're not hibernating because it's cold. They're hibernating because they can't get as many calories as they can in the summer, and it's more efficient for them to sleep through that rather than to try and forage. So for instance, black bears in certain areas of Florida, they don't hibernate. There's no need for them to hibernate. There's food available year-round. Hibernation, and it's an estivation, I know, but hibernation just makes it easier to call it that, isn't not necessary. It isn't required. Most zoo bears also don't hibernate. It's not in the zoo's best interest to get them to fall asleep for the winter. That probably brings your ticket sales down. And because they get the same number of calories as they normally would in January as they would, say, in July, there's no reason for them to necessarily go to sleep. Some zoo bears, they actually trigger hibernation by reducing their caloric intake to try to better understand hibernation in bears and to scientifically study it. But generally speaking, you don't see that. All bears are capable of hibernating, but some hibernate for longer periods than others. Like I said, black bears in our ecosystem here in Grand Teton and Yellowstone are certainly hibernating for longer than grizzly bears, and male grizzly bears are hibernating for a much shorter period of time than most female grizzly bears. Female polar bears will hibernate to give birth in the den, but the male bears won't necessarily hibernate depending on their food resources and availability. And the same goes for things like sun bears and Mongolian bears and the like. So you've gotten into a really, really awesome question and field, Rosalie. I could probably talk about it for 20 minutes, but I won't bore everybody because not everybody's probably as fascinated as I am. But great, great question. We've got a little bit of time left with grizzly bear 610 and 399 before they enter into hibernation. But if it snows again, like it did this week, that could certainly speed the matter up. So hopefully that answers your question. That was a great one. Thank you very much. Let's see here. Let's see here. Don, I hope you find that bobcat, and if you do, I hope you're nice enough to tell me where you found that bobcat, because I'd be very fascinated for sure. It's such a pleasure to see one. All I can do is go to their habitat and look for them at the right time of year and at the right time, and sometimes I get lucky, but it's not something I can just automatically find. So really, really fun. Shirley asks, how often do black bears give birth? That's a great question, Shirley. Black bears typically give birth in our ecosystem about every 2 years or so. So they raise their cubs for 2 years. And then oftentimes, 2 to 3 years is the best way to describe it. So black bear gives birth to their cubs. They go into hibernation with their cubs. They come out of hibernation with their cubs, and typically those cubs will spend a second summer with their mother, go back into hibernation, come back out, and then during that next breeding season, a male bear will often chase them off so they can breed with their mother. Doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes black bears, for instance, will only spend a year with their mother and get bred the next year. Sometimes it might take a year or two after the cubs are on their own for the mother to become pregnant again. But that's the general cycle. Grizzly bears follow the same cycle. And so, my expectation is a bear would typically spend 2 years with its parent. It takes 2 years because they're omnivores and their diet is so varied. You have to learn how to do so many things as a bear, and your mom is responsible for teaching you for most of those things. So you got to know where to forage and when. You have to know how to hunt elk. A really good example of this is grizzly bears historically in Yellowstone National Park ate cutthroat trout during their spawning season in June, when tourists in Yellowstone begin to feed grizzly bears in garbage dumps and what have you, the bears actually lost the skill to be able to catch cutthroat trout, because that's something they would normally learn from their mother. Their mother was in the garbage dump. They weren't acquiring that knowledge. And when we closed the dumps and tried to get bears to go back to their original wild behavior, the bears couldn't get cutthroat trout. And so today, most Yellowstone bears do not actively hunt or eat cutthroat trout in the same way that you would see bears in Alaska and Katmai eating salmon. They don't do that, even though that would be a normal traditional food source. It is hoped that eventually bears are going to relearn the skill and be able to pass it on to their cubs. But you can imagine it takes more than 1 year to get good at catching fish, and it takes more than 1 year to be able to hunt an elk effectively. And it certainly takes more than 1 year to learn how to go from one food source to another, sometimes weekly throughout the season when they're awake. So great question. Thank you very much for that. Let's see. So Carrie, kind of based on that same thing we were just talking about, how long are 399's cubs going to stay with her? Great question. So my expectation is, because these cubs were they came out of their first hibernation, or they were born last winter, they're going to go into hibernation with their mom, come out next spring, spend a whole summer and fall with mom again, go back into hibernation, and then the spring after that, they will be on their own. So 2 years would be the expectation. 399 is a very good mom. She's almost always stuck to that 2-year schedule. The only thing that would change that is if somehow the cubs got separated, if a male bear tried to push them away next spring, which can happen but is unusual, or if for some reason grizzly bear 399, who's an old bear, wasn't able to maintain enough body fat to make it through hibernation, and then of course they would be on their own. But she's looking really good. The cubs are looking really good. I don't anticipate that. So it looks like we've got another year of fun with those quadruplets. If you look at grizzly bear 610's cubs, who are a summer older, they're almost as big as she is. It's going to be pretty interesting to see 5 bears walking around next fall, if we're lucky, that are all, you know, almost adult sized. That's going to be quite the bear parade. I do remind everybody, of course, that grizzly bear cubs in the wild typically have about an 80% mortality rate. I don't say that to be a downer, I just say it so we are all prepared that the odds of all 4 of those cubs surviving to adulthood are low. But here's the thing about 399. I say the odds of blah, blah, blah happening with a traditional bear are low, and she breaks those rules all the time. She's had 3 sets of triplets, and every single time I've said, well, don't expect all the triplets to survive, and they usually do. So shows you what I know. She's such a good mom that she can beat a lot of those odds, and we all sure hope that'll happen in this case as well. So great question there. All right, anybody else have any questions for me? Let's see. I think that's what we've got for the week. Guys, thanks so much for sticking with us with our technical difficulties, for finding us again. We sure appreciate it. It's been such a pleasure spending this Wednesday with you all. I hope you all have a great, safe week. I hope you have a wild weekend, and we'll see you all next week. Big thanks to the Travel and Tourism Board for their support by giving us a grant to continue this program. And by the way, tell us in the comment section what you want to see next week. We take orders. All right, everybody. So long.